Welcome to Smash Fiction, a podcast where we pit fictional characters against one another in a battle of strength, or wits, or, now visualize me doing an arc motion with my hands here, imagination. And see who would win. This week, Calvin versus Doug Funnie. It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, the kindly Mr. Rogers begins to sing, but is rudely replaced by a loud and flashy sci-fi children's cartoon. In front of the TV sits a 6-year-old blonde boy, eyes wide in excitement, with a well-loved tiger plushie propped up by his side. While behind them, in the doorway, are a brown-haired woman in her 30s, speaking with some anxiety in her voice to a boy of 11 years with short hair and a prominent nose. Now, Doug, if there's any problems, please feel free to call me or my husband. We won't be out long, but if there's any immediate emergency, our neighbor right across the street, Mrs. Gosnell, she was a nurse, so she can patch up any little scrape. Not that you two should be getting any scrapes, since I told Calvin he can start watching his shows early tonight. Calvin, don't sit that close to the TV! Anyway, please make sure he eats his dinner. You'll have to convince him that it's actually made out of something gross like monkey heads. Don't ask. It's the only way I can get him to eat anything that isn't hamburgers. Anyway, the theater is only 15 minutes away, so really, if there's anything at all, please call. Or text? Would texting be better? Oh, my husband's pointing at his watch. Okay. Have fun, you two! But not too much.
Also, we don't have names, so I don't know how you're going to contact us.
Also, both of these properties predate text messaging.
Oh, whoops! Oh my god. Oh god, old. We're so old! The sound of her last command seemed to hang in the air for several seconds after the door had shut behind her. Doug stood in the foyer, only now second-guessing whether he was actually qualified to babysit a first grader. But when the polka-dot-fully resplendent Patti Mayonnaise asked him to cover a babysitting job for her aunt, as a favor of which Patti would be eternally grateful, well, no was never an option. Doug walks to the living room, so distracted in his attempt to mentally reassure himself that everything would go smoothly, that it takes him a good minute to realize that Calvin is no longer planted in front of the TV. In fact, he isn't anywhere in immediate sight. That is, until the little boy springs out from behind the couch, shooting plastic darts at Doug. The older boy yelps and stumbles, tripping backwards over an ottoman. From his unflattering position on the floor, Doug hears Calvin talking to himself. The brave Spaceman Spiff approaches the new alien life form with caution, Calvin narrates, and sees it stir. Our hero is out of bullets, but never without his wit. The little boy throws his toy gun at a vase just above and behind where Doug lies, causing the decoration to fall down onto the prone boy. Ow, hey, I'm not... Doug trails off, suddenly realizing an opportunity. He promptly stands and continues with confidence in his voice. You misunderstand. I'm no alien. In fact, I'm the world-famous hero. Doug stops and runs into a nearby closet, leaving a skeptical Calvin to wait for several long moments before the older boy finally emerges, standing arms akimbo. Quailman! So you see, I mean you no harm, adventurer. Calvin narrows his eyes at the now very strangely dressed Doug. That's what an alien shapeshifter would say! He yells and dives under the couch. Two boys, two wildly creative imaginations. Which fictional child's many fictional personas will have what it takes to beat the living poop out of the others? I don't know, guys. I can't tolerate tiny drunk dinosaurs for more than an hour at a time, and that is why I, Kit Mulcairn, am your imaginary judge for this match. That's right. I'm all in your head. And just for clarity, fans, Calvin will be making use of only his Spaceman Spiff, Stupendous Man, and Tracer Bullet personas, while Doug will only use Quailman, Smash Adams, and Race Canyon. Advocating for Calvin are Meganbob.
Freedom and justice shall always prevail over tyranny, babysitter Doug.
And Miles Schneiderman.
A jagged bolt of visual sound representation streaks vertically across the waveform. It's that unmitigated master of meandering metaphors, the meretricious manure mouth Miles. Our hero once again takes a moment to wish he hadn't been quite so intoxicated while coming up with his name.
Advocating for Doug are Dan Mulcairn.
I-oo, killer tofu. E-I-E-oo-ee-oo, Calvin is doomed.
And Colin Mulcairn.
Dear Journal, today was the first time I crushed a small child's hopes and dreams. I finally feel like an adult.
In order to determine which team goes first, I decided to test my 4 co-hosts' willpower. I began to detail my favorite anime and what I love about them in an attempt to see which one of them could come out of the experience unscathed and attentive. I locked him in a room with a speaker and began yammering on. Miles immediately shot himself.
Tapping out. Tapping out.
I don't know where he got the gun, though. Probably from Liz. Speaking of Liz, after about 5 minutes, she began begging Dan to make me stop, but he refused, determined to win. She then used Dan as a battering ram of sorts and broke down the door. We haven't seen her since and had to ask Colin to sub this match. Dan tried really hard to remain conscious after that, but then I started getting into how formative Inuyasha was to my weeaboo-ness, and he just gave in to blessed sleep. Bob was the only one left, and still so politely attentive. And so Team Calvin will be going first this week.
Oh, good job, Bob. I thought we were done for.
Team Calvin, this is a real job for Stupendous Man.
I feel really bad about this match, you guys. Doug is a super nice kid. He's smart and sweet, and everybody seems to like him. He does not deserve to suffer the experience of babysitting Calvin. The only people who can handle Calvin are those with the ability to physically handle Calvin. Doug is like Susie Durkins without the attitude and punching prowess. Calvin would chew him up and spit him out in the real world, the world where Calvin is just a 6-year-old kid too smart for his own good. In the world of imagination, though, Calvin is master, king, and god. Sorry, Colin.
Hey, now I'm here to say something.
He doesn't just draw pictures of his imaginary characters and wonder how they would handle certain situations. He eats, breathes, and lives his alter egos, immersing himself completely in his fantasies. And when you're up against a team composed of the intrepid explorer Spaceman Spiff, the crimson-caped avenger known as Stupendous Man, and the hard-drinking, hard-boiled private eye Tracer Bullet, wearing a belt on your head and your underwear on the outside just isn't going to be enough. A red spaceship on the monitor, your vileness. It's that infernal Spaceman Spiff. Or, as he calls himself, Interplanetary Explorer Extraordinaire. Let's get one thing straight right off the bat. Our opposition has at its disposal an archaeologist, a spy with no gadgets, and a superhero who hangs out in the thicket of solitude and finds out about his enemy's evil plans by watching TV. Nobody in this fight has a technological advantage like Spiff, who wields a variety of futuristic weapons, including the feared Death Ray Zorcher, the trusty atomic napalm neutralizer, and any number of different types of blaster, not to mention heavier artillery, such as hydrobombs. Additionally, there's the aforementioned red spaceship. Spiff is a master pilot, frequently executing stunning maneuvers to avoid a crash, most notably the famous three-point landing. But that doesn't even matter in this fight, because none of Spiff's opponents have the weapons necessary to crash the ship. As a result, the spaceship represents a huge advantage, since it will prove invaluable in taking down Quailman. Not only is it faster and more maneuverable than Quailman's flight powers, but it is equipped with numerous blasters and zorchers of its own, as well as the capability to create a giant smoke cloud, which has incapacitated Quailman in the past, such as in the episode Doug Meets Robobone. Unlike his opponents in this match, Spaceman Spiff is completely and utterly fearless. Whether it's flying through planetary rings, hanging upside down in the void of space, spitting in the face of torture and death, or blasting into the fifth dimension, no challenge is too daunting for the intrepid adventurer. Remember when Han Solo and the crew of the Millennium Falcon found out they were inside a giant alien? Their response was to GTFO in the worst way. On the other hand, when Spaceman Spiff discovers he is standing on top of a massive alien he mistook for the planetary landscape, the sole response? Quote, "Our hero sets his death ray blaster." He has taken on a gigantic doofus ignoramus, bombed huge monsters into oblivion, and destroyed an entire planet by hitting it with a bigger planet. Oh no! Doug's pitiful alter egos are no match for the spaceman! This could be the end!
Dear Journal, today, Doug Funnie is going down. We begin with Quailman, the most used of Doug's alter egos, arguably the strongest of them, which is an achievement, considering a key aspect is external underwear. He's an ideal version of Doug and values brainy things, like quail chess, his time in the thicket of solitude, and repeating his values aloud, which are patience, grace, speed, intelligence. These are noble values, but not the ones that defeat a stupendous man known for bodily launching himself from above onto adults, and playing dirty every chance he gets. Quailman's opponents aren't very powerful. They're ordinary iterations of his day-to-day foes, Roger Klotz and Mr. Bone. The opponents that Stupendous Man squares off against are the existence of school and linear time. Those are not things easily remedied with something like the Quail Eye, which merely makes villains feel hopeless and stupefied. And Clotzilla isn't even KO'd by the Quail Eye. He's just hopeless and stupefied for a bit until Quailman flies off with his absolutely a lesbian love interest, Patti Mayonnaise and BB Bluff, 5 ever. Quailman solves problems by outthinking them. If that's the bar, then it's a low one. It's not a world of superheroics. It's a world of quiet domesticity with his dog and confusing misapplication of clothes. Stupendous Man represents all the go-for-broke madness that comic book heroes are all about. Doug can imagine a bait and switch with a frog, or lying to yodelers about how good they are. Stupendous Man can imagine moving a telescope so it fries his school to cinders. Doug even makes the point in Doug's comic collaboration that Quailman is better than Silver Skeeter because Silver Skeeter is too powerful and, quote, can't lose. The vincibility, yes, it's a word, of Quailman is key to his identity. Not only is Quailman into failing, he's also into having help, like Quail Dog and Silver Skeeter, who help fix situations like being trapped on a junk food wheel or fighting a wacky weatherman. Trapped on a junk food wheel, I repeat. And he needed Porkchop's help to deal with that, because he's a superhero that has to visit the library before he can take action.
Speaking of superheroes, let's continue talking about the hero whose name stands for Stupendous, as well as Tiger Ferocity of, Underwear Red, and Power Incredible. Quailman has the powers of a quail, and that's great for him. Stupendous Man has, at various points, demonstrated powers of flight, super strength, ultrasonic hearing, and a stomach of steel. He has vanquished the villainous annoying girl with a massive snowball, taken on the fiendish crab teacher, and escaped the clutches of Babysitter Girl, a far more formidable babysitter than anyone present in this match. Like Spiff, Stupendous Man is far superior to Smash Adams and Race Canyon, and while he and Quailman are fairly well matched, Quailman could never hope to equal Stupendous Man in ruthlessness. Keep in mind that Stupendous Man, for all his talk about justice, holds the primary agenda of making life easier for mild-mannered Calvin. In service of that goal, he has, as Bob pointed out, stolen a giant telescope lens from an observatory, flown it into space, and used it to focus solar rays to completely wipe out Calvin's school. This dude is basically what would happen if Rorschach got the power cosmic. You remember when Quailman foiled the Rulmeister's evil scheme to speed up the Earth's rotation and thus eliminate weekends? Quailman was able to reverse this process and even add an extra day called Fun Day by appropriating Rulmeister's own machine and making cunning use of the instruction manual. When Stupendous Man wanted to alter the Earth's rotation, he flew down from space and pushed the planet into reverse. And that was so Calvin could have an extra day to finish his homework. What will he do to win this fight? Bench press the planet or something?
Jesus wept. I don't even know where to begin with Smash Adams. Like, in an ideal world, we'd pretend those episodes never happened. Especially Doug's doodle, because he tries to seduce his goddamn teacher, who is in her 50s, and he is 11 and a half years old and doesn't know what a boob is.
I seriously doubt that.
He has an idea.
Yeah.
He's
Look
got
at the back
theories.
pages of his journal. I'm sure he's done some
theories
doodles.
about what a boob could be. Smash Adams is a character armed with the wrong tools for the job if seduction is on the table. Smash Adams has a few gadgets and can sneak up on people from the water, but unless there's a lake nearby, he's screwed. None of this is useful in defeating any of Calvin's imaginary characters. Stealth isn't useful against a spaceman, a superhero, or a private eye with a target on his back. His gadgets are great, but not offensive, purely for scaling buildings or changing clothes quickly. Twice his objectives are art-based, once reclaiming his doodle, the second switching his painting. A shameful lack of diversity in spycraft these days. Yeah, he does try and avoid the dentist that one time, but even if we go with that, his goal is to escape, and escaping isn't how you win an imagination fight. It definitely isn't how you win the crucial battle against gingivitis. So unless there's a pressing need to engage in some sort of art caper or jump into a car and drive away, his abilities are not going to defeat the power of an experienced space explorer, the masked man of Megamight, or a weapon-wielding detective.
We don't have much information on Tracer Bullet, the chain-smoking, bourbon-chugging private eye, but I'll tell you what he does have. A gun! Which is more than Smash Adams or Race Canyon can say. He's good with it too. During the case of the trashed living room, Bullet's client, known only as the Dame, has him dead to rights with a .38 revolver pointed at the back of his head. Bullet is somehow able to spin around, draw his magnum, and fire 3 deadly shots before the Dame can get off a single one. That, Your Honor, is what we call a gunslinger. And again, your tame-ass adventure heroes won't last very long against a nihilistic, alcohol-fueled motherfucking murderer.
Last in Doug's bag of tricks is Race Canyon, an Indiana Jones figure, the explorer, the adventurer with a hat, you know the type. He's got no powers except being sort of braver than regular Doug. He is foiled by the plot from The Sandlot in the episode Doug and the Yard of Doom. Race Canyon is afraid of a large dog. Then he imagines himself doing the most unimaginative of things, like fooling it with a stake and then getting an even bigger dog to scare it. Where is the inventiveness? Where is the ingenuity? Anyone who has seen any piece of media aimed at children ever would know the trying food trick. The getting a bigger insert noun here trick is only slightly further down the list and is just as derivative. Race Canyon doesn't rate when it comes to creativity, except when it comes to reinventing his friend as an ethnic stereotype, so there's that, I guess. And he does need his friend there to support him in both his Race Canyon adventures. Race is so underwhelming that he only appears in 2 episodes, and neither of them rely on him overmuch, because he's so boring. He's standard adventure guy who does standard adventure guy things like deal with lava, spikes, and a minefield. Yawn. Also, Kit, he slaps a snake and he makes an alligator cry. He's obviously a fucking monster
okay.
And not to
Those
be
tears
trusted.
weren't real.
As the coup de grace to all of this, Doug doesn't really believe his own shit. He's got a vivid imagination, but it isn't where he lives, it's where he retreats to. If imagination is the power of forming a mental image of something never before wholly perceived in reality, and it is because my bro Merriam-Webster says it is, then Calvin is wiping the floor with Doug. He builds whole new worlds, new planets of imagination. Race, Smash, and Quailman would struggle to get out of an imaginary wet paper bag. I'm sorry, but Doug's best effort isn't enough to take on Calvin when he's just being his normal self. I mean, I think we all remember the noodle incident, am I right?
Team Calvin, you got dirt all over this blanket. Were you crawling through mud? This better come out in the wash. Anyway, Team Doug, are you in fact the guy who's made of cool and still in school?
Hell yeah.
Both Doug and Calvin are very imaginative individuals. However, they have fundamentally different relationships with their imaginations. Whereas Calvin uses his imagination as a way of ignoring his problems, Doug uses his imagination as a way of solving his problems. Much like an MMO player, although Doug and Calvin each have multiple characters they play with, each one of them has their main. In Calvin's case, it's Spaceman Spiff. In Doug's case, it's Quailman. So let's talk Quailman. Although he comes equipped with your standard package of Silver Age nonsense powers, he is actually not really defined by those powers as a character. Quailman's true strengths are, as he says several times throughout the series, patience, intelligence, and speed. In the episode Doug to the Rescue, Quailman has to battle the many stories tall giant lizard named Clotzilla. Quailman defeats Clotzilla not by punching it with his super strength, but by hypnotizing it with his hypnotic quail eye and making it fall asleep. Later in that same episode, when Doug is confronted by the bully Roger Klotz, who is much larger and stronger than Doug, Doug is able to defeat him by standing his ground and staring Roger in the face, and Roger is intimidated by Doug's stare into backing down. Again, Doug shows his ability to use his imagination as a form of problem solving in the episode Doug Meets Robone. In this episode, Doug and his friends want to have a concert at their school, but Vice Principal Bone won't let them. They whine and complain, but the Vice Principal won't budge. So Doug imagines that the city of Bluffington is invaded by the alien robotic forces of the dread Robo-Bone. Quailman tries a bunch of different ways of fighting them, but can't seem to get an edge. But then after hearing the robots off-key yodeling, Quailman helps them yodel in harmony together and encourages them to get into showbiz. As a result, the robots abandon their invasion plans and let the citizenry go. Doug then takes the lesson back to his real life and decides to get to know Vice Principal Bone and negotiate with him as a friend, and this technique works. He and his friends get to have their concert. No one with less creativity and persistence could have gotten around the problem. It was truly a job for Quailman. In the episode Doug's Comic Collaboration, we see that Doug is also able to collaborate with other people in a shared imaginary space, something that will really come in handy in this match. When he feels like Skeeter's self-insert character, the Silver Skeeter, is too powerful for the story to be interesting, he is able to invent ways that, time and again, his on-paper superior powers backfire on himself. For instance, there is a supernatural storm hanging over Bluffington. Skeeter says that the Silver Skeeter blows the storm away with his super breath. Doug then says that doing so causes a hurricane, which ends up being even more harmful than the original storm. This ability to organically narrate new weaknesses into other people's characters is going to be invaluable in this scenario, where Doug and Calvin are going to be searching for ways to undermine one another's characters. There are just so many other examples of Quailman solving his problems through his intelligence. Here's a couple more. In the episode Doug is Quailman, the evil Dr. Klotzenstein develops a brain drain beam, allowing him to drain the intelligence from dozens of people at once. Even with his enemy's intelligence enhanced several times over, Quailman still proves to be more clever, tricking Dr. Klotzenstein into accidentally stealing the intelligence of a frog. When the vicious Rule Meister takes over the city of Bluffington, using his extensive tangle of nonsensical rules, Quailman manages to defeat him by speed reading his rulebook and memorizing it, and then tricking him into breaking one of his own rules, Rule 1,987,642, which even the Rule Meister had forgotten about, but not Quailman. Smash Adams is like a version of James Bond who is somehow even less tied to the restrictions of reality. Throughout the episode Doug's Doodle, we see that Adams is capable of sneaking, fighting, seducing, and pickpocketing, often simultaneously, with ease and tremendous skill. In Doug's Dental Disaster, we see that he's able to find secret switches, resist torture, escape from a death trap, hop onto a chandelier, and then jump out a window directly into his sweet-ass spy car. In Doug's Math Problem, Smash Adams jumps out of an airplane, riding a snowboard, jumps into a woman's bedroom, steals a piece of paper from her nightstand without waking her up, and then gets away via his rocket shoes, for those of you who said he did not have gadgets. Rocket shoes. Later in that same episode, he fights a group of goons on top of a moving train. They demand that he return the stolen paper, but he fearlessly eats it instead. Race Canyon doesn't get as much screen time in Doug as the other two characters do, making him that third tier, like, Tracer Bullet sort of character, but the time that he does get shows that he could make an entire show just around him and his crazy adventures. Weird racial stuff with Skeeter aside in that one.
I mean, it worked for Johnny Quest.
It did.
Oh,
In Doug in the Yard of Doom, Race battles his way through a jungle, finds a secret entrance to an ancient temple, blocks a cloud of poison darts from hitting him, and manages to get past the giant monstrous dog inside by distracting it with a T-bone steak. Later, the dog catches up to Race and is about to eat him when Race reveals his secret weapon, an even more gigantic monster dog, which he inexplicably keeps in a box. Needless to say, the guardian dog runs away in terror. In Doug's Halloween adventure, Race defeats two bat monsters with one hand while climbing a massive mountain, and then does battle with a haunted house, which turned into a weird giant vampire creature, who ends up thrown off the mountain. Later in that episode, he walks into another haunted house and scares all of the ghosts away. No proton pack required. Doug is a highly intelligent and focused kid, and not only are his egos more powerful and far more intelligent than Calvin's, he is able to learn from his alter ego's adventures to better solve his own real-world problems, like in this case, say, a little child who's being a dumb little shit. This match is totally a foregone conclusion. Calvin has a better chance of finally defeating his bicycle than he does of defeating Doug.
Hey, that bicycle's no joke, man.
That thing was for real. That thing scared me.
Calvin has a different relationship to his imagination. For Calvin, his imaginary world lurks just beyond the edge of his attention span. It's not something he goes into to solve problems, it's something he defaults to when he gets bored. This is a fundamental difference between Doug and Calvin, and it explains why Calvin's characters are such a shit show of incompetence. Take Spaceman Spiff. A lot of Spaceman Spiff stories are just about Spiff getting captured, or beaten up by aliens, or crashing his ship in increasingly embarrassing ways. Spiff is a guy whose weapons regularly break, or are proven useless, who can't get behind the wheel of a spacecraft without crashing it, who regularly tries and fails to defeat or escape from alien goop monsters. Spiff has a lot of impressive sounding gadgetry, but they don't really help him that much. When fleeing the, quote, despicable scum beings of planet Q-13, Spiff tries his Death Ray, Myrtleizer Beam, Phosphobombs, and Mortoblasters, none of which even respond. I know it sounds like I'm exaggerating Spiff's failure rate here, but I went through every single Spaceman Spiff comic strip in Calvin and Hobbes and counted. Through the run of those strips, Spiff's weapon breaks or is proven useless in 12 strips, he gets captured in 19 strips, and he crashes or breaks his ship in 20 freaking strips. Now keep in mind, those are the strips. In several of those, he breaks his weapons multiple times. Buck Rogers, this guy ain't. Now, I'm not sure if Stupendous Man is more or less of an embarrassment than Spaceman Spiff, but it's a damn close race either way. According to Calvin himself, Stupendous Man has only ever won, quote, moral victories, never any actual wins. He does possess powers which would be impressive on paper, but he's so consistently incompetent that they never work for him, and he always ends up losing despite them. The first time we see this guy, he's at the top of a skyscraper, about to leap off to go fight crime, but his fear of heights kicks in, and he ends up just stuck up there. Stupendous Man is the prime example that with great power doesn't necessarily come the ability to deliver great results. And then there's Tracer Bullet. His claim to fame thus far? Well, his first appearance occurs when Hobbs gives Calvin a terrible haircut, and Calvin imagines up Tracer Bullet when he uses a fedora to cover up his head. Tracer gives a monologue in which he talks about his main character traits: being an alcoholic, being unable to pay his bills, and wearing a fedora years before men's rights activists polluted that particular well. Bullet, during this particular scenario, does nothing and solves no crimes. Calvin imagines him a second time as a way to help him puzzle out a word problem. In this story, Tracer Bullet receives a case, fails to get the info he needs from a source, gets distracted and goes to a bar, gets ambushed and beaten up by a mob strongman, and when he comes to, he thinks he's put all the pieces together, and it turns out he's completely wrong. The third time, Calvin imagines Tracer Bullet when his mom comes to him and accuses him of breaking a lamp. In this story, Tracer Bullet is first duped by one of his clients into getting framed for an assault charge, then gets ambushed and beaten to hell by a mobster. That's Calvin's version of Dick Tracy, an alcoholic sad sack who regularly gets beat to hell and has yet to solve a case. But enough about Calvin's Hall of Shame. Let's talk about Calvin himself. I realize that this is a match between imaginary characters, but it's Doug and Calvin who will be calling the shots, and we need to consider how they're going to be thinking about this match and each other. One of Calvin's biggest weaknesses here is his complete lack of empathy, especially for anyone he perceives as an authority figure. If he can't understand Doug's motivations, he won't be able to anticipate Doug's actions, meaning he'll be incredibly easy to fool or trick, whether in an imaginary fight or in the real world. Doug isn't the first babysitter that Calvin has had. Throughout Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin is regularly watched by Rosalind. Most of the time, she has to make him go to bed early, and he responds with screaming and mischief. The one time she scores a decisive victory on him is when she plays along with him, in her case joining a game of Calvin Ball, which he proves to be a natural at. This just shows that Calvin is most comfortable when opposing authority figures who very much think and behave the way that adults do. He knows how to react when an adult tells him to go to bed, or to eat his vegetables, or to go to school. He's less comfortable when dealing with someone who engages with him the way a kid does. The way to beat him is by empathizing with him, joining him in his imagination, and doing things he doesn't expect. When you realize that that's the way to victory against Calvin, Doug was made for this match.
Team Doug. Team Doug! Doug, snap out of it! You were daydreaming.
I mean, that explains it.
As I was saying.
Nonsense.
As I was saying, it's now time for the rebooties. Team Calvin, this might be another baffling case, but you don't hire a private eye for the easy ones, right? Take it away.
Colin mentioned at the start of his argument that Calvin uses his imagination as a retreat and doesn't use it to solve real-world problems. This is fundamentally untrue. My personal favorite example is when Mo is making fun of Calvin because Calvin is, like, looking at bugs, and in his imagination, Spaceman Spiff is reaching for his stun blaster, and in the real world, Calvin is reaching for a rock. These are how you deal with certain problems.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's the case. In other times, he drifts off into Spaceman Spiff when he's trying to solve a word problem and ends up writing, I think, the biggest number he could think of because, like, that's sort of where his little imaginary garden path led him down. It's not reliable because it's not how Calvin's brain thinks. He's not using it to problem solve.
Doug doesn't use his shit to problem solve either. I watched all those episodes you cited. He doesn't get the fucking doodle back. He doesn't get the the toy that he got from Patti's place back. His plans don't work either.
Most of the time, Doug, ends up solving his problems, beating the bullies, that kind of thing. And the times when he doesn't, with the doodle, are sort of, definitely the exceptions. Whereas Calvin, all of the Spaceman Spiff things are about him crashing his ship and, trying to get out of stuff and getting captured. And they all end on, cliffhangers. And the strip's only 4 panels, but they pretty much all end with him, about to get eaten by something.
First of all, yeah, Doug deals with his bullies. That's great. The central bully in his life is such an asshole that he once threw Doug a surprise birthday party.
I know!
Calvin deals with Mo, who is a sadist, and when you're talking about Spaceman Spiff getting shot down all the time, again, strength of competition. There are aliens in spacecraft chasing him. This is a sci-fi, like, space drama going on in Calvin's head. We're coming down to Earth. You're telling me that Race Canyon is going to shoot him down, or Smash Adams is going to shoot him down with their lack of guns?
Okay, hang on a sec, Miles. First of all, I think you've actually brought up a really good point in our favor without meaning to. Both of these characters start off in their stories with these bullies that are very much against them. You know, Roger in the case of Doug and Mo in the case of Calvin. The difference is that because Doug is so empathetic and because he makes an effort to understand everyone, including Roger, Roger gets to the point where he throws a surprise birthday party for Doug, whereas Mo is in the same sadistic place regarding Calvin that he's in strip 1, because Calvin makes no effort to understand him or anyone else.
That's ridiculous.
I'm not cool with this idea of, like, learn to empathize with your, like, abuser.
Also, you watch Doug long enough and you realize that Roger isn't actually that bad. He's kind of a cool kid. The surprise party thing...
he's not.
Yes, he is.
Has a pregnant cat!
The surprise party thing happens at the end of season 1 or the beginning of season 2. It's not like it's this huge character arc for him. He's not the worst person in the world.
The thing about empathizing, what we say when we mean that, is not like see them as a person who is like a good person, but more like just being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Like the whole thing he did with Vice Principal Bone, or he also did with the Wacky Weatherman in the episode with Silver Skeeter, where he's able to like figure out, and he states this phrase, he uses like figure out using like psychology. That's how like Quailman defeats all of his people. So he figures out like all of his villains have like these big glaring personality flaws and these like psychological weaknesses, and he exploits them because he understands them, which is something you could do very easily against Calvin, who also has really giant psychological weaknesses. And Calvin never shows any sort of ability to like put himself in another person's position or like make a plan.
Do not tell me that Doug is some kind of psychological mastermind who beats his enemies by empathizing with them though. No, he's not. Don't even fucking do that shit.
Okay, so one of the things that you brought up was that Doug is, every time Skeeter says, oh, well, then Silver Skeeter would do this, like Doug pokes holes in it. I feel like what you're telling me is that Doug is sort of able to cock block his own imagination. I mean, as well as other people's imagination, but his own imagination, because in his mind, that's like not a reasonable thing. Whereas what is reasonable is like a trip to the library or is playing quail chess.
So hang on, you're saying that Doug's ability to accurately gauge the side effects and the end results of certain actions is a weakness? Like you're
of imagined hurricanes, yeah.
I think that what that's going to lead to is Calvin's characters making decisions which are very reckless and poorly thought out, which Doug is going to point out to him, and then Calvin's going to realize how incredibly rash his actions are, especially when they start having very bad intended consequences.
Team Doug, surely a man among men, with nerves of steel and iron will be able to deflect all that slander. Go for it.
Okay, to get into some specific examples, you were talking about the fact that no one in our little stable of imaginary characters has the capability of shooting down Spiff's ship. The thing is, we really don't need to. In the episode with the Wacky Weatherman, the way that Quailman ends up taking down this guy, he's basically a weather controller who operates out of this like armored blimp above the city. They can't even get close to him because he's so much stronger than they are. Quailman basically ends up tricking this guy into striking himself with lightning. And that's how they defeat him. It doesn't matter that you have this spaceship. It doesn't matter that on paper you're much stronger, because we can think circles around you and we can trick you into taking yourself out. Spiff himself crashes into planets so often, whether or not he's being shot down by aliens. All it's going to take is the slightest psychological nudge, get Spiff to overclock his ship just a little too much, and he's out of gas and he has crashed into the ground.
You realize you're talking about an 11-year-old, right? In terms of all this shit? You're talking about Doug like he's Emma Frost.
Dude, when Calvin is Spaceman Spiff, he narrates his thoughts out loud. You don't need to be a mind reader, you just need to have ears.
So, I mean, Spiff, yeah, but, okay, fine. So that happens, and then Spiff rises and fights another day. That's the kind of stick-to-itiveness that we bring to this thing, is the inability to know when we are beaten or wrong.
Or a cloud, or we shoot out a cloud of dust and Doug chokes on it. Quailman chokes on it like he does.
We actually don't ever see how Spiff gets out of most of his problems. Most of the strips end with him just like, captured by aliens and about to die. So I actually posit that he probably just has like a bunch of clones or something like that, and all of these Spiffs are dying at the end of the strips.
I'm gonna go more with Dan's James Bond supernatural luck argument.
The reason he escapes is because he's an imaginary character and is not a slave to continuity. That doesn't mean that he's not grotesquely incompetent and fails all the time, even within these imaginary circumstances.
Except when he's blowing shit away and finding ice cream sandwiches on long lost planets.
So that's your plan? You're going to defeat Race Canyon by finding ice cream sandwiches?
No, I'm saying that in the face of utter starvation and death, Spaceman Spiff found fucking ice cream sandwiches on a distant planet. You cannot keep him down.
Doug, it has a weakness against ice cream because in the episode whenever he babysits Skeeter's little brother and it all goes terribly wrong, he gets defeated with ice cream.
You talked about the bit where Stupendous Man used his powers to turn the planet backwards and like reverse time and stuff like that. What we see there is that like in the very next panel after that, we see that he just has returned back to reality and hasn't actually solved anything. He just sort of like, Doug was able to, in the same thing where he was like messing with time and messing with the rule meister, he actually did manage to solve the problems and getting Principal Bone to like break one of his own rules and like,
Dude, that strip is the best example of Calvin doing that, because at the beginning of that strip it's Sunday and at the end of that strip it's Saturday.
Also, the school is blown up in the other one. So, these are facts.
Quailman has a long history of successfully defeating people who are a lot stronger than he is, who have more impressive powers than he does.
Although he does still have really good powers, I do want to state, because we didn't really talk about that. He does have all the he like flies and he has super speed and he has the quail eye, like all that stuff. Like,
my point is that Spaceman Spiff has never once been shown to go up against someone who is actually intelligent. Most of the time, his enemies are these sort of like mindless goop monsters that just like put him in prison and take him to meet their queen or whatever.
That's absolutely not true.
He's never seen outsmarting a smarter foe, which is what he's up against here. This is exactly the sort of thing that Doug's characters go up against all the time.
That's absolutely not true. There's a strip of Spaceman Spiff where he's on the run, he's being chased by aliens, and he runs backward. By the way, this is another thing that Calvin does in real life to escape his parents, in analogy. He actually runs backwards in the soft dust dirt of the planet to make them think that he has gone the opposite direction, thus fooling them and escaping.
Hey, boys! Boys! The arguments are getting pretty stormy out there. Come inside. You know you're not supposed to be playing outside during the lightning round.
Oh no.
Oh, wow.
The imaginary battle reaches its climax when Calvin, feeling pressed by his worthy opponent's comparable personas, withdraws a small water gun from underneath a couch cushion. "Hold it!" he yells, aiming the toy at Doug, "or I'll turn you into an actual quail." Doug skids to a stop in front of the TV, hands up. "Whoa, is that a transmogrifier gun?" "That's right," Calvin replies. "I see you know your tech. Now hands where I can see 'em." The older boy begins raising his arms in compliance before reaching up, pulling his belt off his head and using it as a lasso to grab the gun. Calvin is yanked forward with a yelp. "Oh no, it's not supposed to do that!" Sparks briefly emit from the gun before a ray of kaleidoscopic technicolor shoots the TV, causing an explosion that envelops the room. When the multicolored dust finally settles, the boys find themselves in a strange miniature town encircled by a trolley rail. The town is in shambles. Signs of fighting can be seen everywhere, and the rail appears too damaged for a trolley to actually make use of. Then, as if by overly convenient cue, from out of the trolley tunnel, a vroom is heard approaching until a black Lincoln emerges, skidding and Tokyo drifting across the wasteland of rail tracks. The tiny car comes to an elegant stop in front of the confused boys, and its driver lifts his sunglasses to get a better look at them. "Don't think I've met you two tall ones before. The name's Neil. Are you coming to the riot?" he asks as he motions toward the castle in the distance. The boys look over to find a mob of puppet citizens crowding the gates of the miniature castle, chanting, screaming, tiny pitchforks and torches in hand. Doug turns back to the little car first and asks, why are they rioting?" A beat-up little cat puppet sitting in the backseat replies, "It's the new king, Tuesday!" "Ever since his father, the kind King Friday the 13th, died, King Tuesday has ruled with an iron fist." "Some say he killed his father," adds a disturbingly ugly duck-billed platypus puppet sitting next to the cat. Look at how he's displayed the bodies of those who oppose him.
Jeez.
Jesus. Mr. Rogers has gotten dark.
HBO's Mr. Rogers.
Kid's just making herself laugh over there now.
Yep. We've reached critical mass
Noises
here.
on the other end.
It's so my humor. That's when Calvin notices the many puppets skewered and propped up on the ramparts as a grim warning. He clutches his hands to his mouth and tries not to vomit onto the tiny car and its passengers. He exiled the other big citizens, Neil continues. But if you two help us, I'll bet we can stop King Tuesday with minimal casualties. So, brave heroes, both imaginary and real, tell me this. Would your character aid the people of the neighborhood of make-believe, or would they help the Mad King Tuesday stop the riots? Tell me how they would use their miniature surroundings and imaginations to best effect in achieving their goals. Keeping in mind that these boys still see each other as enemies or rivals, even if they ultimately have the same goal, how would they get in each other's way? Team Doug, as is custom, you now get to go first. And I'm out of both references and patience, child, so just go.
So Doug looks upon the broken remains of this trolley lying nearby and the track that it's on. And he starts to think, we could potentially use this to our advantage. Doug, of course, by the way, is siding with the rebels because tyranny and oppression cannot stand, as we've seen in his many battles against the likes of the Rulmeister and Dr. Klotzenstein. Doug brings forth his Quailman persona and very quickly speed reads a bunch of books on engineering and mechanical repair. But he also speed reads a bunch of books on the creation of tanks and war machines.
Oh, jeez.
So he
Tiny takes, I hope.
he quickly repairs the track and then armors the trolley so that it is now a weapon of war.
Such an adorable little weapon of war.
And he leads the puppets on an invasion of the castle. Once inside, Race Canyon begins to swing his way across the various traps and fighting his way through the various monsters and guards that have been set up, while at the same time, Smash Adams begins to go around planting all sorts of traps and detonators around the castle. And by the end, King Tuesday has locked himself in his panic room equivalent, and he says, "You can't get to me here! This room is impenetrable!" And Smash Adams says...
Skeletor, huh?
Yep. Yeah, King Tuesday was Skeletor all along.
He's going to slip in disguised as one of King Tuesday's servants, and while he's in there, he's going to, of course, sidle up to him and be like, "Oh, all these people here, they're so down on you. They're not recognizing your greatness, but I see you for who you really are, and I'm on your side." And of course, and he's gonna say, "Oh yes, you're of course my true friend. I knew I could trust you." And then they're gonna be hanging out together in the panic room for a while. Time's gonna go on. They might open up a bottle of old wine, get kind of cozy by the fire.
What? Whoa, no.
I think that Smash Adams might bust out his other skill set, which is, of course, his powers of seduction. To get King Tuesday to get his guard down. At which point he can hit him over the head with a bottle and drag him out of the castle and hand him over to his people.
Well, I'm gonna go scrub my brain. No, but I'm happy with... I don't know, Dan gave me imagery of Anna Platypus dressed as Rambo. So, I'm just imagining this adorable little war-torn puppet land. Anyway, all right, Team Doug, Tag, you're out. It's time to let Calvin have his turn.
I think Calvin's first thought is going to be, there's chaos going on. I think I can add to this. First things first is that Stupendous Man is going to have to look around and find some tools of chaos. So, Lady Elaine Fairchild happens to have a boomerang that is capable of turning the neighborhood upside down.
Oh, yeah.
That's going to come in real useful because they're puppets. And puppets don't work upside down unless you have a really good grip.
I'm not sure Calvin's taking a side on this one, because, part of me feels like the rebels would tell him what they're doing and he would want to oppose them. But honestly, I just feel like he's in favor of mayhem.
Yes!
And stopping Doug from doing what he wants to do.
So he's going to get the neighborhood turned completely upside down and then add to it. And so instead of the rioters being against, King Tuesday now, they're going to have a new problem on their hands. And King Tuesday is going to have a new problem on his hands because guess who's coming for that throne? It's Spiff Stupendous Tracer Bullet. It is
the most
going
elegantly
to be
named character.
It is going to be an alcohol, guns, and zorcher, also blowing up schools themed Reign of Terror, mostly. You thought it was HBO before!
You know, if there's one thing Doug really likes to do in these situations, it's like come up with a plan and fail at it, but try really hard. You know, I can see this happening as he tries to organize these rebels, just as Dan and Colin have laid out. The problem is that in the service of chaos, Calvin and his alter egos have essentially become the neighborhood of make-believes, like playing both sides of the field arms dealers.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah!
Because Calvin's a smart kid, right? He knows something about U.S. foreign policy, so he knows how this works. In keeping with his like lemonade stand business acumen, additionally his further scientific knowledge, he is going to be playing both sides of the field and selling both of them his patented cardboard boxes. When he's going to sell both sides the duplicator, for example, which will increase the number of troops killing and dying on the field of combat. You know, so this war is going to keep going on and keep getting bloodier and bloodier
And
as people
also
realize...
increases the number of people you can sell duplicators to.
Exactly.
You mean more and more stuffing will fall upon the landscape.
That's right. As people, you know, realize that their troops are expendable. However, that's just the beginning. Things are going to get really fucked up when he starts selling them a different kind of cardboard box because... And I know I've said this a lot lately, but it just keeps being applicable. Calvin kind of invented time travel. Because when the box, of course, is open at the top, it is a time machine. So when he starts selling time machines to both sides, then shit's gonna get real fucking crazy.
God.
Time Wars!
I don't care what Doug's plan is. When both sides are duplicating and time machining each other to death, in addition to being regularly turned upside down, it's going to be a little hard to go through with it.
Miles, do you want an Age of Apocalypse? Because this is how you get an Age of Apocalypse.
The one thing I wanted to add was that as a final, like, scourge over the land, as everything is going horribly wrong, the transmogrifier will be brought out.
Oh, yeah.
And Spiff, Stupendous Man, and Tracer Bullet will all be transformed into tigers, but like tiger versions of themselves. So in a kind of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but tiger, mutant, small child, horrible things. They're going to take over and
yeah, I mean,
the stuffing will be torn from all.
What I want you guys to picture is just the image of a world burning. And like behind it, like somewhat transparent, the massive face of Calvin with that sick upside down triangular smile.
I thought you were going to say that it was going to be his bumper sticker version and he's just peeing on the flaming world to put it out.
I mean, he's got a lot of powers, Dan, I admit, but he can't pee like...
I've seen him pee on a great number of things, including concepts.
All right. Kids, it's time for Mommy to go drink her special Mommy's Only grape juice. So play quietly for a few minutes, please. Should have got my tubes tied.
Is this a safe place? Can I make an admission?
Oh, please.
As I was watching Doug, I had forgotten that for some reason, for 8-year-old or 9-year-old me, like, you have no idea you think you know where I'm going with this. You have no idea where I'm going with this.
I do think I know where you're going.
I do as well.
Were you rekindling some long dormant feelings?
No, I was not. I was being baffled by remembering that I ever had these feelings, but it was not for any of the major characters. I had like the most passionate crush an 8-year-old or 9-year-old can have on Mr. Dink.
Oh, man.
I have no explanation. I don't know why or what it was, but yeah, that was like a potent symbol.
Wow.
Of my
But
not
did you want like a sugar daddy? Because all of his like
I
very
don't know.
expensive
Maybe
stuff.
I did just really like maybe small me was super like there was some sort of I don't know attraction component. But I mean, the allure of stuff is pretty powerful. So
Nothing
I don't know.
like a fat purple man with dentures.
Like it was pretty serious, guys. I'm not gonna lie.
Wow.
I have no explanation. I know.
Wow, that was a solid zag. I was not saying that.
No, all y'all fuckers thought I was going a different way, and y'all were wrong.
I gotta ask though, revisiting it now, presumably decades later, what was your experience upon seeing your erstwhile object of affection?
Jesus Christ, what was wrong with me? I mean, I can remember the emotion. and I can remember the level of fervor with which I felt it, but everything that inspired it is gone. And that's weird because normally I can kind of remember, but no, there's nothing. And so now it's just this thing lost in time.
If I said with a straight face that I'd had no emotions whatsoever of that variety toward Calvin's mom, I'd be lying.
Really? At that age or at a different age?
I don't know, with me and Calvin and Hobbes, there's no that age. I've been reading that shit pretty much continuously over and over again since I was 8.
Okay.
So,
you know what? I've heard that about some of the grown-up characters on Sesame Street.
oh, have you?
What
I don't know,
people
she's-
develop
I have.
feelings for them?
Yeah, that they're this weird space between, because when you're a little kid, that your differentiation of kinds of love is so weird. You say to your relatives, "Oh, I want to marry you when I grow up."
Oh yeah, sure.
So that there were people who were thought that Maria, they wanted Maria to be their mom, but also were had sort of pre-sexual sexual feelings about her.
I mean, if it's between her and Snuffleupagus, I know which one I'm more attracted to. So maybe there's some a comparison advantage she has.
Bill Watterson once said that he was always really interested in Calvin's mom and kind of wishes that we got to see more of her when he wasn't fucking shit up and driving her insane. And you can see little pictures of that in what she's doing before he comes in, painting or gardening or baking something or whatever. I don't know. I just feel like she's got this real underlying layer of sensuality maybe that just doesn't come through.
Oh, I love where this is going.
Especially
so much soulful digging.
Especially because Calvin's dad, I'm not even sure if he knows what sex is. He just doesn't seem like the type.
Really? He seems like such a passionate anti-capitalist.
I know, but
obviously...
I'm look, as a passionate anti-capitalist myself, I'm not going to say that they're not interested in sex.
He can get passionate about peanut butter and screams in the store and was asked to leave. If that's a man who can get heated up about potato chips
that's
and
true.
Corporate marketing,
yeah.
This is a man who can make some magic happen.
Okay, all right. I take it back. I take back what I said.
He just needs to read some Karl Marx right beforehand, and he's good to go.
Well,
my God!
I know that's what I do.
Hard. Diamond hard.
Can I just say real quick, not to change the subject away from these children's characters and how sexy they may or may not be.
What the fuck, man? What did I come? I said no.
No, I'm so sorry. It's my fault, but not that way.
And can I just say, Bob, your bit in the lightning round put my mind in, I visualized it as very George R.R. Martin-esque, and and suddenly I saw Henrietta Pussycat as a Daenerys figure, and
my God.
she winds up having 3 actual cats with her, and everyone's like, "Oh God, cats, no!" The Game of Thrones, you win or you get thrown in the dryer 1,000 times. Welcome to Smash Fiction, strength or wits or blah blah blah. Team Calvin, you really brought the strength. You convinced me that he comes up with some great shit. And Team Doug, you really convinced me of the wit. God, I just played out all the scenarios you guys gave me in my mind, and I'm gonna have to say Doug, Team Doug, man.
Yes.
I took it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And I love Calvin so much more than I like Doug.
Oh, that's okay.
But Doug, they convinced me that his 11-year-old smarts would win him this match.
It's okay if Dan put the quail on you. Quail eye on you.
The quail.
I mean, that's how he
Quail
got
eye.
me,
Yeah.
That's how I got this ring on.
Excellently done, Miles and Meganbob. You guys are worthy opponents as always.
We've kind of had a few weeks worth of thanks to catch up on, so I'm going to split it up a bit. I'm just going to thank everybody who shared our Patreon links. Thank you so much, guys. You made it happen.
Shout out to everyone who decided to jump on the Patreon train, because it's so flattering and so helpful to us, and it really does make a big, big difference to us.
But specifically, thank you to, this is over to Twitter, Florian, Mike Booch, Neil Butler, Rafael Medina, The Film Narc Podcast, Cosplay Fiend, Sharon Holden, Emlyn625, Add a Son of a Gun, Vander Turner, Tyler Folman, Rafael Medina, and The Gameable Podcast. And then over on Tumblr, thank you to Byforge and Fire, Jeep Rhyme, Geek Haven, and Sid Rabbit Blog. And on Facebook, thank you to Jeffrey Ketchum. I specifically worked in Nancy Gosnell into the opener, and Neil Butler into the weird Mr. Rogers' neighborhood of make-believe apocalypse.
Because they are patrons.
They sure
Yes,
are. If you
were our first two.
If you pledge at any level, you get special thanks on the show, and
In a weird way, and this is
in
weird.
a weird way, like being worked into the opening arguments and lightning round.
Neil, you're a little puppet.
If you're a patron and you're disappointed that you haven't come up yet, don't worry, your turn will come.
Yes, we're going to be taking a couple of patrons every episode. We have several to get to, but we will get to all of you.
Oh, so sorry. We forgot to say who recommended this beautiful Sword Boys match last time. Like, we thanked you on the social media, but once again, thank you to Paladin Today and to Neil Butler for recommending 2 different parts of that match. I wanted to say this when Liz was here, but we're not exactly sure when she'll be back. So I did tell her in person, so don't worry. But Cam Brogdon, I believe an Australian, revealed that Foster's is like the piss that they sell to foreigners. So Foster's delicious piss. I don't know. I don't drink beer. You guys tell me. Fuck.
It's Australian for we.
We have 2 new iTunes reviews.
Oh,
Really?
Yes, we do. So the first one comes to us from the United States. It is titled One of My Favorites, and it is by Sandwich Surplus, who gives us 5 stars. And the review goes...
Sandwich Surplus?
Yeah.
Aw, he's great.
Yeah. I don't remember how I came to find this podcast, but I'm glad I did. I mainlined the whole of their catalog in the course of 2 weeks.
Jesus Christ.
Wow. No.
That's too
Why?
much.
Not
That's too
recommended.
much.
Oh my gosh.
Listening to this podcast and their discussions reminds me of college days, a time before smartphones, a time when I would get 2 a.m. phone calls to weigh in on an argument over who came first in the comics, Hobgoblin or the Green Goblin, or who's the better Tomb Raider, Indiana Jones or Link from Legend of Zelda. Though these arguments are a lot more structured than those phone calls and probably way less drunk. Well,
I mean,
I know about Miles and
yeah,
Liz
it
sometimes.
depends.
don't assume anything. That's all I'm saying.
Revisit those Hunger Games episodes and tell us what you think. The rotating cast of friends keeps things fresh with new, loud opinions. I've also fallen in love with Extraordinary League. This is an actual play they do once a month of the GM's own design that sounds like so much fun to play. I'd describe it, but I think it's better if you just listen to it. Long story short, this podcast is great, and I love it. So, thank you, Sandwich Surplus.
Aw.
Much appreciated.
Sky, you're the best.
I want to kiss your bread lips. You're so nice.
So, Bob, in your mind, this is some sort of sandwich elemental that has written this review?
I mean, that was what I was hoping.
And our second review comes to us from Australia. This one is titled Awesome Podcast, and it is from Brenton Harsh, who gives us 5 stars.
Oh, hi, Brenton.
A brilliant idea turned into an awesome podcast. After finding this podcast a couple of months and just now catching up, it was a thrill. The wonderful idea of putting pop culture icons against each other in a battle of strength, wits, and ridiculousness, and the fantastic chemistry of all the hosts, makes for a flawless podcast. Keep up the great work, and don't forget, Doom!
Oh, no.
I try so hard to forget, and these fuckers, they don't let
I
me.
know.
It's never gonna happen. It's never gonna happen.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Childlike Wonder. Next week will be our first match voted on by our Patreon supporters. Hades versus Jafar versus Ursula versus Dr. Facilier.
Smash Fiction is produced by Miles Schneiderman and production assistant Sharon Holden, with logo design by Colin Mulcairn.
Special thanks to Kevin MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod at Incompetech.com for our theme song, Hitman.
You can find us on Twitter at SmashFic Podcast and search for the Smash Fiction Podcast on Facebook, Tumblr, and YouTube.
Subscribe on iTunes or your podcatcher of choice, and if you leave us a good review, we shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Smash Fiction is made possible thanks to our supporters on Patreon at patreon.com/smashfictionpodcast. Please consider donating as little as $1 each month. It helps us keep the show going, and we have great rewards and extra content for those who help us out.
If you have any suggestions, feedback, or other contributions, send them to us at smashfictionpodcast@gmail.com and help us continue the fight.
The getting a bigger insert noun here trick is only slightly further down the list and is just as derivative. Race Canyon
Penis.
doesn't
It's getting
rate.
a bigger penis.
It's getting a bigger penis. Yeah. This problem. We're going to need a bigger penis to take on this shark. Oh man, I'm going to just start using that from now on for all things. I mean, like I haven't already been using that. We've got a problem. I rush in with the giantest dildo in history. Okay, sorry.
What is that one called? The Great American Challenge?
I shall fetch a strap-on.
You know what, you guys? I kind of feel like we might be getting slightly off the rails
You're
on
right.
this match involving children's cartoon characters.
You're right.
You're right, you're right. Time flies when you're really getting super angry over little boy fights.